Just a couple days ago, on September 27th, this project was featured as Sight of the Day on Awards. And the moment you land on it, you are greeted with this stunningly minimal, infinite product slider built around this circular, joystick-like controller. It right away caught my eye, not just for the aesthetic, but because it resonated with the kind of design I personally gravitate toward, clean and interactive. You can cycle through different products using the directional controls, but the real magic happens when you click on the center pad. The side products slide outward and fade away, and a model rises into focus, showing product details, a thumbnail preview, and a full bleed background that reinforces the visual identity of the item. It's simple, but so well executed, and I hadn't built anything like this in a while, so I figured it was time to give it a shot. After about 8 hours of exploring the animation and rebuilding it from scratch, I ended up with this version, fully powered by vanilla JavaScript and GSAP. It has that same infinite slider behavior with smooth transitions between items and a glassy product preview that opens and closes with a single click. You can see the center controller morphs into a close button when the model is active and resets everything with a clean exit animation. In today's video, I'll walk you through the code, how the entire experience is built, from the infinite slider logic to the preview model and all the animations in between. If you find these kinds of rebuilds helpful, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you'd like to access the source code for this project, plus hundreds of other similar micro projects, and a brand new website template every month, you can check out the Pro membership via the link in the description. Alright, let's jump into the code. Let's start with the HTML. At the very top, I'm adding a wrapper div with the class container. This will hold everything, the navbar, the gallery, the controller, the banner, and the model, all stacked within this single container. Inside that, the first element is the navigation bar. We have got two elements here, one on the left for the logo and one on the right for the current product name. Right now, I have hard-coded it, but we'll update this dynamically later using JavaScript whenever the active product changes. Next comes the main section, a div with the class gallery. Inside the gallery, I am adding an empty unordered list with the class products. This is where we'll inject the product items dynamically using JavaScript, looping through an array of objects that contains the product name, tag, image, and URL for each item. Still, inside the gallery, we add the controller. This is the circular UI element that sits near the bottom center of the screen. The controller is split into two main parts, an inner circle and the outer ring. Let's start with the inner part. Here, we have added a close icon which is made up of two empty span tags. These will animate into an X shape when the model is open, so the center of the controller doubles as a toggle. Then, inside the outer section, we have got a few controls. At the top, there is a label that says menu, and below that, we have added two navigation buttons, one for previous and one for next, each with a unique class and an iron icon inside to represent the direction. These will be the clickable controls for cycling through the product slider. Right after the gallery, we have got a product banner section. This holds a full screen image element and we'll use it as the background layer that fades in whenever a product preview is open. And finally, we add the model itself called product preview. This floating panel is split into three parts, the info section, the image, and the button. In the info block, we have got two elements, the product name and the tag. Both of these will be updated dynamically based on whichever product is selected. Below that, there is an image wrapper with the product thumbnail. And finally, we have got a call to action button that links out to the product page. The button is wrapped inside a div with the class button and includes a standard anchor tag that says view details. And that's it for the HTML. We have got all the structural elements in place, the navbar, the dynamic slider container, the controller with the interactive elements, the preview model, and the background banner. Next, we'll move on to the CSS and start styling everything. I am starting by importing two Google fonts, DM Sans and DM Mono. Together, they keep the design clean and minimal. Next, I am defining a set of root level color tokens. There is a simple grayscale scale from pure white to solid black, labeled from base 100 through base 500. We'll use this consistently across the background, text, overlays, and interactive elements so the palette stays cohesive. After that, I am doing a quick global reset. Default margin and paddings are removed and everything uses border box sizing so widths and heights are predictable. For the body, I am setting DM Sans as the default font, a white background, and I am hiding overflow. That last part helps us keep the edges clean when elements animate in and out of frame. Paragraphs get a small, dense style, a slightly reduced font size, medium weight, and tight line height. This keeps labels compact and crisp. Now for the overall container, its position relative fills the full viewport height and hides overflow. This creates a stable stage for all our absolutely positioned layers and animations. The navigation bar sits absolutely at the top and spans the full width. It uses Flexbox to push the logo to the left and the product name to the right, with some padding around the edges and a higher stacking order so it always stays on top. Inside the nav, the text is uppercased and switched to DM mono for that UI label feel, and the product name is softened with a mid-gray so it reads as secondary. The gallery section is also absolutely positioned and fills the full screen height using the safe viewport unit so mobile browser Chrome doesn't clip anything. Overflow is hidden here as well to keep the slider tidy. Inside the gallery, the products list is centered on the screen. For now, it's a fixed 300 by 300 square that we'll use as the stage for the active slide. Each list item is also absolutely positioned at that size with content perfectly centered using Flexbox. I have marked all the list items with will change transform. That's a hint to the browser that these will animate frequently. The images inside each item are sized slightly smaller, 250 by 250, so they sit with a comfortable margin inside the square. Now for the controller, the circular pad at the bottom. It's centered horizontally, lifted slightly above the bottom edge, and given fixed dimensions. User selection is disabled and the cursor is set to pointer so it feels clickable. It sits on a high Z index so it's always accessible above other layers. The inner controller is a smaller dark circle centered inside. It uses a circular clip path and will change on clip path so we can animate that shape smoothly later. This inner area is where the close icon lives. That icon is just two spans positioned at center. They start at 0 width, they are 2 pixels thick, and they share same white color as the inner circle's foreground. One span is rotated 45 degrees and the other is negative 45, so when we expand their width and animation, they form a clean X shape. Transform origins are centered for a precise rotation. Behind that, the outer controller fits the full circle. It's a darker ring, rounded, and also uses a circular clip path that will animate during the toggle. It sits just beneath the inner element on the stacking order, creating a clear 2-layer control. On top of the outer controller, there is a simple label positioned near the top that says menu. It's centered horizontally, uppercase, uses DM mono font, and is styled in white. Opacity changes on this label are also optimized with will change since we'll fade it out when the model opens. The navigation buttons sit vertically centered on the left and right edges of the outer ring. They share the same white color, slightly larger icon size, and a pointer cursor. These also mark opacity as a will change so that disabled state can fade smoothly. The previous button is nudged in from the left, the next button is nudged in from the right. When either is disabled, opacity drops to a quarter and pointer events are turned off so they are inactive. Next comes the product banner, the full screen image behind the model. It sits underneath the main content on the stacking order and starts completely transparent. We'll animate its opacity to bring it in during the previous state. The image inside it is set to cover the screen and is scaled up slightly so it feels cinematic and avoids any edge gaps during movement. Now for the model, the product preview. It's absolutely centered, horizontally via left and right combo, and vertically anchored a bit above center, then translated down so it starts off screen. Width is set to 30% of the viewport and height is 75% with internal padding and a soft radius. The background is translucent, white layer and a heavy backdrop blur so it gives it that glassy frosted look. Content inside stacks in a vertical column with consistent gaps. The model sits above most layers so it can float over the slider. The info at the top aligns item center with a small horizontal gap. The product name gets a slightly larger paragraph style while the tag becomes a small pill, padded, rounded, dark background, white text. The tag text is uppercased, switches to DM mono, and is reduced in size so it reads like a compact category badge. The image section takes up the full width and uses a perfect square aspect ratio. It gets a small radius, a white backdrop, and hides overflow so the thumbnail clips cleanly. The image inside fills the box and uses object fit cover to maintain its proportions while filling the square. Finally, the call to action area styles the button container. It's dark rectangle with rounded corners, centered content, and the anchor spans the full height for an easy hit target. The link uses white text and removes the underline for a cleaner look. For responsiveness, there is a breakpoint at 1000 pixels. Below that, the preview model stretches to use the full available width minus a small margin on each side. This keeps the layout balanced and readable on smaller screens while preserving the same structure and interactions. And that's the full CSS pass. We are ready for the JavaScript to drive the interactions. Now, before we dive into JavaScript, let me quickly explain how we are going to handle the product content. I've created a separate file called products.js. Inside this file, we have set up an array of objects, and each object represents a single product in our catalog. Every product has a few key properties: a name, which is the title that will show up in the navbar and the model, an image, which points to the product's image file, a price, which we can use if we want to display the cost information, a tag which works like a category label, and finally a URL which links directly to the product detail page. By structuring the data in this way, we can dynamically inject products into the slider instead of hard coding them into the HTML. This means the list inside our gallery can stay empty at first, and JavaScript will loop through the array to create and update the items on the fly. And with that data layer in place, we are ready to move into the JavaScript, where we'll connect the slider mechanics, the controller, and the preview model, all powered by GSAP animations. Alright, at the very top, I'm importing GSAP. This is the animation library we'll be using to handle all of the motion throughout the slider. Right after that, I'm also importing the products array from the file we created earlier. That's the file that holds all of our product data, the name, image, tag, and link. We'll be using it to dynamically populate the slider and keeps everything synced between the navbar, the model, and the background banner. Next, I am grabbing all of the key elements from the DOM using query selector, the products container, product name, the wrapper itself, the product name, the thumbnail image, the category tag, and the URL button. I am also grabbing the product banner and its image. This is the full screen background that fades in behind the model. And finally, I am selecting the controller elements, the inner and outer circles, the two spans that make up the close icon, and the previous and next buttons on either side. By storing all of these as variables upfront, we can reuse them later when we set states, update content, or trigger animations. After that, I'm setting up a few state variables. Current product index keeps track of which product is currently active in the slider. Slide item starts as an empty array. We'll use it to store references to every slide element we generate. Then we have got two booleans, isPreview animating and isPreview open. These help us log interactions while an animation is running and also track whether the model is open or closed. Now we are defining some constants for the slider mechanics. Buffer size is set to 5. This is how many extra slides we'll keep on each side of the active product. So the slider fills infinite as we scroll left and right. Spacing is set to 0.375. That's the relative distance we'll use to space out the slides. And finally, slider width is calculated by multiplying that spacing by 1000. This gives us a consistent unit in pixels that will apply to the exposition of each slide during layout and animation. Next, we are defining the add slide item function. This handles creating a new slide and inserting it into the DOM. First, we calculate the correct product index. We take the current product index, add the relative offset, and then wrap it around the length of the products array using modulo. This way, even if we go beyond the start or end of the list, it loops back around, giving us the infinite behavior. Then we grab the product at that index and create a new list element. Inside it, we inject an image tag with the product's image and alt text. We also assign a data relative index attribute, so we always know how far this item is offset from the current center. Before adding it to the DOM, we use GSAP's set method to define its initial state. Its exposition is based on the relative index multiplied by our slide width. If it's the active item, meaning relative index equals 0, we scale it up to 1.25 and set its index higher so it pops forward. Otherwise, it's scaled down to 0.75 and placed behind. Finally, we append the element to the products container and push a reference into the slide items array along with its relative index. That way, we can keep track of it for updates and removal later. Speaking of removal, right after that, we have the remove slide item function. This does the opposite of what we just built. It looks through the slide items array to find any element with a matching relative index. If it exists, we remove that element from the DOM and also splice it out of the array. This keeps our memory clean and ensures we are only ever rendering the slides we actually need. And that's the setup. We have just imported GSAP and our products, selected all the core DOM elements, defined our state, and written the first two utility functions for adding and removing slides. Next, we'll move on to updating positions and syncing content so the slider always knows which product is active. Now that we have got the ability to add and remove slides, let's set up the functions that keep the slider in sync as we move through the products. First is update slider position. This loops through every item we currently have in our slide items array. For each one, we check if it's the active slide, meaning its relative index is 0. If it's active, we scale it up to 1.25, give it a higher index, and place it front and center. If it's not active, we shrink it down to 0.75 and push it back visually. All of these adjustments, including its exposition, are animated smoothly with GSAP using a 3/4 second duration and a soft power 3 easing. This is what gives the slider that polished motion as items glide into their new positions. Next, we have got update product name. This one takes the current product index, wraps it safely around the length of the array, and then updates the product name inside the navbar. So as soon as we navigate left or right, the nav text always reflects whichever item is active in the center. Then we move on to the update preview content function. This is very similar, but instead of just updating the nav, it updates everything inside the preview model and the background banner. We grab the current product from the array and then set the model's name, swap in the current thumbnail image and alt text, update the tag so the category label matches, change the link on the button, and finally update the banner image that fades in behind the model. This ensures that whether you are just sliding through or opening the preview, every part of the interface is tied to the same product. Now let's talk about navigation, starting with move next. This function is triggered whenever we click the next button. The first thing it does is check two flags. If the preview is animating or if it's currently open, we don't allow navigation. This keeps things stable so we don't break the flow mid-animation. If we are good to move, we increment the product index to the next item, then we remove the far left buffer slide since it's now out of view. For all the remaining slides, we shift their relative index down by 1, effectively sliding them left. After that, we add a new buffer slide to the far right to replace what we lost. Finally, we update the slider's position, the product name in the nav, and the preview content so everything stays consistent. Move previous works the exact same way, but in reverse, we decrement the current index, remove the far right buffer, shift every slide's relative index up by 1, and then add a new buffer item to the far left. And again, we update the positions, the nav, and the preview content. This back and forth logic combined with the buffer system is what gives the slider its infinite feel. Next up, we have got update button states. This one is simple. It checks if the preview is either animating or open. If it is, both of the previous and next buttons are disabled by lowering their opacity and removing pointer events. We are animating clip path anyways to hide the entire outer wrapper, but in case if you want to keep the outer layer as is, this function might be useful. If not, this one is simple. It checks if the preview is either animating or open. If it is, both the previous and next buttons are disabled by lowering their opacity and removing pointer events. If not, they are re-enabled. This way, you avoid any accidental clicks while the model is active. And finally, there is active get slide function. This just looks through the array of slide items and returns whichever one has a relative index of 0. In other words, it's a quick way for us to always grab the current center slide whenever we need it for the animations. So at this point, we have got a fully functional loop for updating positions, syncing product content, and handling the navigation with proper button states. Next, we'll move into the animations that happen when we toggle the preview model, fading out the side items, transforming the controller, and sliding the model in and out. We'll start with animate side items. This function is all about dimming or revealing the slides that sit around the active one. First, we grab the currently active slide using the helper we wrote earlier. Then we loop through all the slide items. For any slide that's just 1 or 2 steps away from the center, we animate its position and opacity. If we are hiding them, meaning the model is opening, they slide further out, fade to 0, and make room for the preview. If we are showing them again, they slide back into their normal positions and fade back in. We also treat the active slide differently. If we are hiding, we shrink it down slightly and fade it away. If we are showing, we scale it up larger and make it fully visible again. Altogether, this creates that clean transition where the surrounding products disappear and the focus shifts fully to the model. Now let's talk about the controller itself that's handled in animate controller transition. Here, we are animating 3 different parts, the label and nav buttons, the outer ring, the inner pad with the close icon. When the preview opens, the label and the nav arrows fade out quickly since we don't need navigation while the model is active. The outer ring shrinks down using a clip path animation while the inner circle expands slightly, creating that morphing effect between the joystick and the close button. Finally, the close icon spans animate in. Their width grows to 20 pixels, one after the other with a slight stagger, so they form the X shape that closes the model. When we reverse the interaction, all of these animations play back in reverse. The X collapses, the pad shrinks, the ring expands, and the arrows fade back in. This whole sequence makes the controller feel like a living toggle rather than just a static button. With those 2 helpers in place, we can now move on to the main toggle logic itself, the toggle preview function. The first thing we do is check if an animation is already running. If it is, we skip it to avoid conflicts. Otherwise, we set a flag that tells the system an animation is in progress and disable the navigation buttons. If the preview is about to open, we also update the content inside the model and banner so the visuals match the current product. Then we animate the model's Y position. If we are opening, it slides upward into view. If we are closing, it slides down and out of frame. At the same time, the product banner fades in or out behind it with a slight delay so it feels layered. And after that, we call our 2 helpers, animate side items to fade, the surrounding slides in or out, and animate controller transition to morph the joystick into the close button. Finally, we use a short timeout to reset the flags, marking the animations as complete and flipping the open state. This ensures everything is synced and ready for the next interaction. And now, to bring it all together, we have initialize slider function. This function sets up the slider when the page first loads. We loop through a range from negative buffer size to positive buffer size, adding extra slides on both sides of the active product. This creates the illusion. Then we call all the update functions once, so the slider positions, product name, model content, and button states are perfectly synced with the first product. The very last step is attaching event listeners. We listen for clicks on the previous and next buttons to trigger navigation, and we listen for clicks on the controller inner pad to toggle the model open and closed. Finally, we call initialize slider function to render everything into place, and that's the full JavaScript. With these functions working together, we have built a complete infinite product slider powered by GSAP animations with a controller that doubles as both a navigator and a preview toggle, and a model that syncs seamlessly with the product data. Hope you found the video helpful. See you in the next one.